As a part of the sort of trust-making grant, in a way, I think of it as a trust-making grant, Rula and I are organizing a conference in London, and we'd like to actually talk to you a little bit about the conference to encourage those of you who are interested to still send us abstracts, but also come, because the conference is one of the first of its kind, and having the kinds of conversations we've had at the Halal conference will really change the nature of the discussion. So it's the first international interdisciplinary conference, competitive capital creation, religious values. It's 30th and 31st of May, and we'll talk a little bit about how to think about the conference is organized around the relationship between capital and trust. We'd like to pick up on the question of how do Muslim communities post 9/11 address the question of trust. And I think many of the sort of presentations here actually are at exactly the cusp of that sort of interrogation. And so we actually like to pick up on the question of trust and expand it. We're trying to actually bring together international interdisciplinary perspectives. We'd really like, in some ways people here, I think the Halal conference actually did that, and we'd sort of actually like to expand it even further if possible. But we sort of to really think, so part of the project is to actually begin to rethink how communities trust each other, how they sort of manage to actually reinvest themselves in trust when it's broken, when it's abrogated, when it's lost. We're interested in the question of trust between Muslim and non-Muslim communities, but I think Ryan raised this, but also how Muslim communities trust literally what it means to be Muslim. And I think the Halal conference raised this in many, many, many different spaces, through many different projects, avenues. Okay. So trust, for those of you who've thought about it extensively, and I think this project has, it's at the heart of community formation, relationships between individuals and groups. Even if I say something to you right now, you're actually in the act of listening, giving me a small modicum of trust, just to actually be able to open yourself and listen. Who we decide we're going to listen to, people who've come to the Halal conference actually have decided to ally themselves as intellectuals with this project, right? That, at the heart of that is trust. The places that you feel are different. One of the interesting things is, in some ways, trust-making is at the heart of what the discussions last night addressed, which is the difference between what's actually strictly legislated and then what falls into the Islamic secular, right? That break or that separation and that connection between the two is actually thinking about questions of where you imagine the lines of trust are drawn. And this is actually particularly urgent. Ordinarily we do trust all the time, but at points of breach, which is something I'm interested in, and I think Rula's interested in too, the question of trust really comes to the forefront. So we actually want to think about, sort of actually focus on the question of trust in one particular way, through capital. So we're actually, we want to just give you a sense of the kinds of things we're looking for. We're actually looking for a very broad range of papers and conversations. We want to think about capital through the question of Islam, so values, businesses, brands, markets, We want to sort of have conversations across different spaces, and I think the sort of discussion of safe spaces is one way to think about this sort of exchange. We actually want to really actually, in a rigorous way, think interdisciplinarity. But some of the papers we are getting and we want to work with include business management, marketing, finance, economics. But we also want to think about, many of the papers here dealt with the question of commodities, right? So rather than just focusing on the commodity, we also want people to think about the larger kind of philosophical questions that underpins how a commodity is capitalized. I mean, halal itself becomes a kind of logo in which you invest capital and therefore trust. So that's a kind of the general questions that have, I think, floated around in this conference, actually at the heart of what we want to get people to engage with. We are interested in historical, philosophical, religious questions, and we're sort of also interested in creative perspectives as well as empirical research. But one of the sort of aspects I think is unusual in the conference we're organizing is we actually want practitioners, so as well as academics. So we actually want to have people come and present, sort of talk about how they started a business, how they sort of marketed or branded certain notions of ideas of halal, and actually get the community members in conversation with them. So these are some of the, actually a few of the topics. Do you want to?
We have 3 themes. Of course, it's not limited to, but you can see they are quite wide. In the first theme, we're trying to, establish better understanding of how Islamic values are represented in businesses' practices and what they change and would they help in creating trust or not, from a very different perspectives, whether in Islamic finance and fatwa, and knowledge management and sharing of knowledge, sustainability of business, and how you could apply Islamic values and sustain a business. The second theme is about establishing trust among communities and the role businesses play within that. Also in different aspects of management, finance and marketing. And the final theme is about capabilities to serve, enhancing business capabilities to serve both Muslims and non-Muslims. And this is really something I'm very interested in, that you see us not just developing businesses for Muslims in the West as a niche market, but to become part of the fabric of the whole economy, where we are developing businesses and brands that serve everyone in the community, not just Muslims. And this will be something very interesting to see more thoughts and work about.
So, obviously we think capital in a very broad sense, the way Pierre Bourdieu actually begins to sort of introduce at the beginning, when he talks about social, so we're actually thinking social, political, economic, the ways in which they flow together, intersect, reimagine the spaces in a kind of conversation.
Yes, absolutely. So these are the partners, and we have special issue journal for business and society and business review, ranked 2 stars by the ABS. We have the Islamic marketing also supporting the conference by Emerald. And of course, the funding project, which is the Muslims Trust and Cultural Dialogue from the UK. Okay. So the second outcome we're working at, and still tentative idea, is the book. Do you like to talk
So
about
it's
it?
actually, because the conference is unusual, we actually have at least one journal issue that we expect to come out of the conference, but we also would like to sort of to take those articles and add more to them and publish a book. And these are, we were actually thinking about, I mean, this comes from Rula's interest in some ways, but also really thinks about the market in a much wider sense, the market as a conceptual as well as a literal entity. So these are some of the topics we were looking for. And you can see the sort of contiguities with the conference: Islamic markets and marketing, Islamic offers and branding, halal negotiations, Islamic capital, knowledge management, sustainability, IT management, innovation. And this goes back to your talk, actually, to really think about the questions of governance in a much wider sense. Sort of not just government, the law, but actually think governance through the questions of the way in which Antonio Gramsci thinks about hegemony, the ways in which forms of everyday living actually are organized, are made, are constituted through notions of governance.
We'll move now to an introduction of a paper I'm working on within the last 5 minutes.
And I'll sit down. And then, if people want to ask me questions, we can also, people can ask me questions after the conference is over as well.
5 minutes.
Yes, 5 minutes. So I'm just sharing with you early idea of the paper and ending with a question to see your responses and opinions about it, really. Because as you've seen, I'm coming from a marketing background, and the conference was very enlightening for me. Thank you for the organizers. Wonderful, great experience, actually. My material is slightly different. I worked on what we call nation branding in terms of research, and nation images in terms of countries, peoples, and regions. And I'm looking at the influential perceptions that usually influence nations' images, and how does it influence the brand image of Islamic products and Islamic brands, and in this context. So if we looked at the nation image, just to define what we are trying to talk about, some of beliefs and impressions people hold about places. A simplification of a large number of associations. Now, the definition is talk about place, but I'm focusing on nations because nations are people, and so they could be across places, across borders. They could be within a country, they could be within a number of countries, they could be spread across the world. And this is where Muslims comes, because although they could be very fragmented, they are considered a nation. In my study, that I came across the Arab in Western eyes, because I looked at Arabic countries' cases. And Lawrence of Arabia, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, had his own ideas of who are Arab and what they are described. And many of the stereotypes until today is based on these old literature explaining what that part of the world is, followed by the Orient. So when I did the search in 2011 on google.co.uk, because the results would be different somewhere else, about the Orient as image, those what I got. I am not showing you the paintings because they're showing nude women, but you can see them online. So this was the first thing came at the second line. The first line is nice Japanese, folklore and traditional clothing, and the second line is the Orient, where they are talking about Marrakesh women and baths, etc. So. And the online is the source today for information for people. Now, then I looked at Edward Said's works, which is very interesting. And we're familiar with his theory, I would expect. So Orientalism, and he talked about imperialist exploitation and exercise of power, etc. in the Arab region. But then even in 2003, the last time he added for the book in the introduction, he expressed that nothing seems to be different from 78 until 2003, which is, problematic, to say the least. So it is quite common to hear high officials in Washington and elsewhere speak of changing the map of the Middle East and how reshaping that part of the world. Peanuts in a jar. So I did a search again this morning just for you. And I came across those. Again, the first line is Japanese women clothing, and the second one are these. So less offensive, but the Orient as seen in the old days, and apparently a brand of cigarettes. So, however, if you say Muslims, then this is what I received on google.com. So worshipping and dominating the world. So these elements, and I've seen on the news first night I came, the summit that Obama is holding, and the petitions in Texas against the domination of Muslims, and the viral marketing video that is seen by 10 million people online about a product that seems to be in the brand have different meanings against religions in a way. Monster, I think, it's a drink. So, these also influencing how the nation, if we talk about Islam nation, is perceived in general. But then coming to business, when I search online in the UK for Muslims business, I came across this directory, which show you businesses with reviews from customers, etc., and rating, but it's really all targeting Muslims, targeting a niche market. Muslims products for Muslims consumers, and it's a Muslims directory for a product. But there are products that generate from Muslims countries that became global brands and accepted by all, if not most, if not all, Western customers. Like the Emirates, we have the Excel London Exhibition Centre in London that is run by the Abu Dhabi National Exhibition Centre. We have Sofra, the Turkish kitchen, with a huge number of restaurants as a chain, and the Turkish Airlines, just as an example. So those two different Muslim countries, they managed to have a brand that is highly associated with their nation, but highly successful at international and global level. So coming to the nation image and brand image and nation image, there is a relation that proved, I'm not going to go in details through these because of the time. The relation has been proven in the marketing research, looking at how the choice of a brand is influenced by the nation image. Because it's cultural, so the cultural codes really deciding the meaning of the negotiations for consumers to make up their perception of the brand. Again, so it's about negotiating the place in and between a marketing environment, cultural and social environment, that you make up your perception about the brand, highly associated by the environment and the place. So this study is aiming to check the influence of the influential perceptions that has been shown in the nation image study, friendliness, trustworthiness, and national management of a nation image, on the brand image. Yes. on the brand image. And I'll leave you with the question. Now, the friendliness, trustworthiness, and national image are highly associated with the state in aspects of nations. So if you trust the state, then more likely in relation their international relations, you trust the nation. If the state international policies are friendly, which means familiar and similar to the other countries, then these other countries will find you friendly as a nation. And if there is national management of the communication of the nation image, then there is more a balance in terms of the representation of your nation image abroad. So just to leave you with this question in mind, if it is a cultural realm, can be different between different nations and different countries, and it is certainly different when we talk about Islamic nation, fragmented across the world, but is united because they are Muslims. How the elements of friendliness, trustworthiness, and national management you think might be influential and might affect the development of brands and, sorry, my voice, and expanding it across the world. Thank you very much.